I ran down the hallway, my shoes slapping against the cold hospital floor. Each step echoing like a warning I wasn't ready to hear. The bright overhead lights flickered past me in long, blinding stripes, making everything feel unreal, like I was trapped inside a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My chest burned, my breath was shallow, and my heart pounded so violently that I could feel it in my ears. I didn't know exactly what waited for me behind the doors of the operating room, but every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. Just minutes earlier, I had been sitting in the family waiting room, scrolling through my phone to distract myself, while my husband underwent what was supposed to be a simple routine surgery. The doctor had assured us it was nothing serious. 30 minutes, maybe 40, he said with a calm smile. He'll be awake before you know it. But 40 minutes turned into an hour, then an hour and a half. Nurses rushed past with tense expressions. A code was announced over the speakers, but no one told me who it was for. And then, out of nowhere, a young nurse sprinted into the waiting area, her face pale, her breathing uneven. She looked straight at me, as if she already knew exactly who I was, and said in a trembling voice, "Come with me now." I didn't ask questions. I just followed her. Now, as we reached the double doors of the operating wing, she suddenly grabbed my arm hard. Her fingers dug into my skin as if she was anchoring me from falling into a pit. "Wait," she whispered, glancing back over her shoulder. Her voice dropped, urgent, desperate. "You need to hide." I stared at her, confused, my heart slamming against my ribs. "What? Why? What's happening? Where's my husband?" Her eyes darted around the hallway, checking for anyone watching. She leaned in closer, her breath shaky. "It's a trap." For a second, the world around me stopped. The hallway became unbearably silent. I couldn't hear the machines, the beeping monitors, the muffled footsteps, nothing. Only my pulse pounding like thunder. "A trap?" I repeated, barely able to form the word. "What are you talking about?" She swallowed hard, looked at me with fear shining in her eyes. Real, bone-deep fear, and whispered again, "Please, you need to hide, right now." But there was no force on this earth that could have kept me from seeing him. Not fear, not confusion, not even danger. Something inside me, primal and unstoppable, took control. I yanked my arm from her grip and pushed through the doors before she could stop me. The operating room was cold, bright, sterile, but it felt like death lived there. Doctors stood frozen around the table, their hands mid-motion, as if someone had hit pause on reality. Their expressions were unreadable, shocked, tense, almost guilty. Machines hummed softly, casting strange lights across the room. And there, lying under harsh white bulbs, was my husband. The sight of him hit me like a physical blow. His skin looked gray, too gray. His chest moved, barely. His eyes were closed, his body still, covered halfway by a surgical sheet. I took one trembling step forward, then another, and then I froze. Because something was wrong, very, very wrong. Not with him, but with the people standing around him. Their faces weren't focused on saving him. They were focused on me. Every single pair of eyes turned, slow, deliberate, locking onto mine with a coldness that made my blood turn to ice. No warmth, no professionalism, no urgency of a team trying to save a patient. Only calculation, only the feeling of being hunted. The young nurse had been right. But by the time I understood that, it was already too late. For a few unbearable seconds, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I stood there trapped between instinct and reality, staring at the people who were supposed to be saving my husband, people whose eyes now held something sharp and predatory. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating, thick with something unspoken and terrifying. One of the surgeons, an older man with a neatly trimmed gray beard, slowly lowered the instrument in his hand. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked prepared, like he had been waiting. My stomach twisted. "Mrs. Linton," he said calmly, his voice smooth in a way that felt wrong, like honey poured over broken glass. "You aren't supposed to be in here." The way he said it sent a cold shiver down my spine. Not surprised, not startled, just annoyed. My eyes darted to my husband again. His chest rose weakly, his breathing irregular. Tubes, wires, machines, everything was attached to him. But something felt off. The monitors were on, but they weren't beeping normally. The rhythm wasn't steady. It was too slow, too flat, as if the machines themselves were hesitating. What are you doing?" I gasped, trying to step toward him. Another doctor, a woman with sharp cheekbones and unreadable eyes, moved slightly, subtle but deliberate, blocking my path. "You need to leave," she said flatly. "This is a sterile environment." "No," I whispered, feeling a tremor take over my voice. "No, let me go to him. He was fine this morning. You said it was routine. You said—" "We know what we said," the gray-bearded surgeon cut in, his tone still infuriatingly calm, "but circumstances have changed." I felt my pulse spike. "What circumstances?" Silence. Not a single person answered. The surgical staff exchanged glances, silent, coded glances, like people sharing a secret they didn't intend to reveal. The young nurse's warning echoed in my ears. "Hide, it's a trap." My throat tightened. I felt every hair on my arms rise. My body was trying to warn me, to scream at me to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. My eyes kept darting back to my husband's chest, rising so faintly it barely moved. "What did you do to him?" My voice cracked, breaking the fragile quiet. "Tell me." The surgeon stepped closer, too close. As he approached, a strange metallic scent hit my nose, not the clean antiseptic smell of a hospital. Something else, something wrong. "Your husband," he said, choosing his words with unsettling precision, "is in a very delicate situation, and if you want to keep him stable, you need to cooperate." Cooperate. The word hung in the air like a threat. I stumbled back a step, my back bumping against a metal tray. A scalpel rattled on the surface. The sound echoed through the room, sharp, slicing through the tension. The woman doctor moved again, her eyes never leaving mine. "You're interfering with a critical procedure." No emotion, no concern, just control. I forced myself to speak, my voice barely above a whisper. "I want to talk to the nurse who came to get me." At that, the entire room shifted, slight but undeniable. Something flashed in their eyes. Real alarm, just for a moment, before they hid it. The surgeon tilted his head, studying me as if I had revealed something I wasn't supposed to know. "Nurse?" he repeated, too casually. "What nurse?" I froze. He knew. He knew exactly who I meant, but he was pretending otherwise. My legs wobbled. I felt faint, sick, overwhelmed by a sudden, horrifying realization. These people weren't trying to save my husband. They were trying to stop me. "What is happening?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Why are you lying?" The woman doctor stepped toward me, her hand lifting, not in comfort, but in expectation, as if she intended to grab me. "Mrs. Linton, please come with us. You're stressed, emotional. You need to sit down." "No!" I almost screamed, backing away. "Don't touch me!" For the first time, their calm cracked. The surgeon's jaw tightened. Two other staff members took small steps closer, forming a subtle semicircle around me, cutting off the only exit behind them. The machines around my husband continued their strange, slow beeping, like a countdown. The room felt like it was closing in, the walls squeezing me into a corner. My chest tightened so violently that I could barely breathe. I didn't know what they wanted, what their plan was, or why my husband was at the center of it, but everything inside me screamed that I had to get out. I had to survive. I had to save him. Because whatever this was, it wasn't medicine. It wasn't surgery. And it wasn't an accident. It was something intentional, something planned. And as the surgeon took another step toward me, lifting a gloved hand as if ready to restrain me, I finally understood. I was never supposed to be here, and now that they weren't going to let me leave. The moment their circle tightened around me, my instincts took over. My pulse roared in my ears as I stumbled backward, searching desperately for any opening, any crack in their formation. They moved with eerie coordination, calm, steady, almost rehearsed. It didn't feel like a team of medical professionals trying to help a panicked woman. It felt like a trap closing around its prey. Then I saw it, a narrow gap between two nurses, near the supply shelves, small but real. Without thinking, I lunged toward it. Shouts burst behind me, sharp, angry, urgent. but their voices blurred together as adrenaline surged through me. I darted past a cart, knocking over a tray of instruments with a metallic crash that echoed through the room. My shoulder slammed into the tall supply cabinet, and for a breathless second I thought it would topple over, but it stayed upright. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I sucked in a shaky breath and slipped behind the cabinet, crouching low in the narrow space between the shelves and the wall. My heart hammered so violently it felt like it could give me away. The cold tiles bit into my knees, and the sterile smell of gauze and alcohol filled my nose, grounding me just enough to stay silent. Footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate, hunting. "Where did she go?" A man's voice hissed. "One of the doctors, the one with the gray beard." "She can't be far," another replied. "Check every corner." I pressed a trembling hand over my mouth, terrified even my breath might betray me. Their footsteps split into different directions, moving with controlled urgency like people trained for crisis. But I was the crisis they were hunting. My mind raced. What did they want? Why were they doing this? What were they doing to my husband? My throat tightened painfully. I wanted to run to him, to rip out the tubes, to hold him and scream until he woke up, but I knew that if I moved now, they would catch me. And if they caught me, I didn't know what would happen. But the fear in the nurse's eyes, "Hide, it's a trap," rang like a siren in my skull. The cabinet rattled above me, and I froze. Someone was rifling through the supplies, just inches away. A shadow moved across the floor under the cabinet, its shape stretching and shrinking as the person shifted. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Please don't look down, please don't look down." The shadow paused. My breath stopped. And then, finally, mercifully, it moved away. I dared to open my eyes again, only to see another shadow approaching from the opposite side. This one smaller, one of the nurses. She muttered under her breath. She shouldn't have seen him like that. This wasn't supposed to happen. My blood turned to ice. Seen him like that? Who? My husband? Something else? Something worse? The nurse moved on before I could make sense of the words, leaving me drowning in a new wave of dread. Slowly, carefully, I shifted my position to peek through a narrow gap between the shelves. The operating room was visible from here, but only barely. I could see the edge of the table, a glimpse of my husband's hand, limp, pale, unmoving. And the machines. Their beeping wasn't slowing anymore. It had stopped completely. A suffocating stillness filled the room. The doctors weren't gathered around him. They weren't performing CPR. They weren't even looking at him. They were searching for me, and my husband lay there, abandoned, as if he were no longer their priority. Pain carved itself into my chest, sharp and unbearable. Is he alive? Oh God, is he alive? I bit down on my trembling lip, fighting the urge to run to him. Running meant being caught. Being caught meant danger. Danger I didn't yet understand, but could feel closing in. A sudden clang echoed through the room. Someone had kicked a metal tray in frustration. "She can't disappear," the gray-bearded surgeon snapped. "We don't have time for this. Find her, now." Their urgency didn't feel medical. It felt desperate, dark, as if something far bigger was unfolding, something I had never been meant to witness. My breath came in shallow, silent gasps as I pressed deeper into the shadows, praying I would stay invisible a little longer. Because now I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was happening here wasn't about surgery. It wasn't about medicine. It wasn't even about my husband's health. It was about silencing me before I discovered the truth. And I could feel, deep in my bones, that the real horror was only just beginning. From my hiding place, the room felt like a cage full of predators pacing restlessly. Every sound sharpened. Footsteps, whispered arguments, the rustle of gloves, even the hum of fluorescent lights drilling into my skull. I hugged my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible, but my body trembled uncontrollably. Then something changed. A sudden commotion rippled through the room, hushed, tense, urgent. "She's waking up," a nurse whispered. At first I didn't understand. Waking up? Who? I shifted inch by inch, risking a glimpse through the narrow sliver between the shelves. Not my husband. A woman. She lay on a second gurney I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a rolling instrument cabinet, shielded from the front of the room. Her skin looked cold and fragile, a faint bluish tint staining her lips. She wore a hospital gown, her wrists marked by dried bruises. Electrodes clung to her temples, attached to strange, unfamiliar devices that didn't look like typical medical equipment. Her eyelids fluttered weakly. She wasn't supposed to regain consciousness yet, the gray-bearded surgeon muttered angrily. Increase the dose. No, the sharp-boned woman doctor snapped quietly. Not until we know how much she heard when the spouse ran in. If she recognized anything, She stopped abruptly. My breath caught in my throat. Another spouse? Another trap? Another victim? The woman on the table struggled, her fingers twitching. A soft, broken sound escaped her throat, like someone trying to speak underwater. One of the nurses placed a hand on her shoulder, pressing her back down. She's too weak, the nurse said. She can't move. Then keep her still, the surgeon barked. My heart clenched violently. I didn't know who she was, what they were doing to her, or how she had ended up here. But it was suddenly, horrifyingly clear. My husband wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. The woman's breathing quickened. Her eyes opened halfway, dazed, but filled with raw panic. She stared at the ceiling as if searching for something familiar, something safe, something human. She didn't find it. The surgeon leaned over her, blocking her view. You need to stay calm, he said, his voice dripping with false reassurance. It will all be over soon. Her lips parted. For a moment, I thought she was going to scream. Instead, she released a broken whisper barely audible. Please, please don't. That sound sliced through me like a blade. The room went silent. Then the woman doctor leaned closer to her. If you behave, she murmured. This won't hurt. Won't hurt? What in God's name were they doing? The machines beside the second gurney flickered with strange patterns, waves and lines that looked nothing like normal medical readouts. I didn't understand their meaning, but something about them felt wrong. Dangerously wrong. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from crying out. My entire body shook with helpless anger and terror. This is going too far, one of the younger nurses whispered, her voice cracking. We can't keep doing this. Someone will... The woman doctor snapped her head toward her. Someone will what? The nurse swallowed hard, her eyes dropping. I'm just saying, someone will notice eventually. No one notices, the surgeon replied coldly. No one ever has. A chill poured through my veins like ice. No one notices. No one ever has. Then what about my husband? What about me? I wanted to burst from hiding, grab the woman on the gurney, and run as far as possible. But reality held me still. If I moved now, I would be caught instantly. And if they saw me... A sharp metallic click cut through the room. The surgeon lifted a syringe filled with a clear liquid. Too clear, too calm. Hold her, he ordered. 2 staff members pinned the woman's arms down. She whimpered, her eyes wide and terrified. She tried to shake her head, but her strength was fading fast. The doctor positioned the syringe near her neck, just below her ear. I felt bile rise in my throat. No, she whispered, barely audible. No, please. Her voice broke, and that was when something inside me snapped. I couldn't sit here anymore. I couldn't watch them do this. I couldn't let them walk back to my husband next. A surge of raw, desperate courage filled my limbs. I had to act, not recklessly, not loudly, but with purpose. Because whatever they injected into that woman, they planned to do to my husband too. And I wasn't going to let that happen, not while I was still breathing. The moment the syringe pierced the woman's skin, my entire body jolted as if I had been stabbed. Her eyes rolled back, her limbs slackened, and a hollow, muffled sound escaped her throat, a sound that would haunt me forever. The staff loosened their grip only when her body fell still, her chest rising in slow, shallow movements that didn't look natural. Not peaceful, not unconscious. Controlled, silenced. I pressed both hands over my mouth, fighting the urge to sob. My vision blurred with tears, but I couldn't wipe them. Not when even the smallest movement could give me away. My husband lay helpless on one table, this unknown woman on the other. And I was crouched in a shadowed corner, the only person awake and aware in a room full of monsters. When the doctor set the syringe down, his face was devoid of emotion. Good. Now finish with her, he ordered the staff. Once she's processed, deal with the spouse in room B. Room B. My blood turned to ash. My husband. Whatever processed meant, I knew it wasn't something any human being should go through. Panic surged through me, a roaring wave that almost made me faint. But beneath that panic, something fierce sparked alive, a raw, untamed instinct I didn't know I possessed. I couldn't run blindly, but I could wait, and I could act at the exact moment they weren't ready. The buzzing fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the room. The staff moved with mechanical purpose, lifting the sedated woman's limp body and transferring her to another table. I watched every step, every motion, memorizing their patterns. They weren't expecting anyone to fight back. They weren't expecting resistance. They certainly weren't expecting me. I waited until two nurses moved toward the far corner to prepare equipment, leaving a narrow pathway open. The surgeon turned his back, speaking quietly to the woman doctor while pointing at a chart. This was my moment. Silent, sharp, fast. I inhaled once, deeply, then slipped out from behind the cabinet like a shadow unhooked from the wall. My legs felt weak, but adrenaline kept pushing them forward. I stayed low, almost crawling, and stayed behind the rolling instrument stand until I reached the backside of my husband's table. He looked worse up close, too pale. His lips were colorless. The machines showed flat lines, lines that should signal an emergency, lines that anyone should have rushed to respond to. But no one did. No one cared. A sob escaped me, tiny and strangled. I reached out, brushing the back of his hand with trembling fingers. His skin was cold. Not dead, but close enough to make my knees buckle. "Please," I whispered, barely audible. "Please stay with me. I'm going to get you out. I swear." I searched desperately for anything to remove. Tubes? Wires? I didn't know what was safe. The wrong thing could stop his heart entirely. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw the tray. On it, a scalpel glinted under the harsh overhead light. A weapon. A risk. A chance. My breathing steadied as my fingers closed around the cool metal handle. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but if they came for me, if they came for him, I would do whatever I had to. Just as I slipped the scalpel into the sleeve of my gown, a shadow fell across the floor. Not mine, not my husband's. Someone had turned. "Wait!" a voice said sharply. I froze. The gray-bearded surgeon stood across the room, his gaze locked onto me with cold, venomous realization. Time slowed. He lunged toward me. I didn't think. I reacted. With trembling hands, I yanked at the nearest cable attached to my husband's monitor. The machine screeched with a sudden alarm, blaring through the room. Everyone whipped around. Chaos cracked through the staff like lightning. "What is she doing?" "Stop her. She'll kill him if—" But that was the point. The moment the alarm went off, automatic systems triggered. Doors unlocked, emergency lights blinked, and somewhere in the hallway, an automated voice announced a code. Not a medical team, but a security alert. Exactly what I needed. Before the surgeon could reach me, I shoved the rolling instrument table into his path. It slammed into his legs, and he stumbled, crashing into a metal tray that clattered across the floor. Nurses shouted, knocking over equipment as they scrambled. I grabbed the side of the gurney. "Come on," I whispered to my husband, even though he couldn't hear me. "Come on, please." I pushed with every ounce of strength left in my body. The wheels screeched. The door swung open. Footsteps thundered down the hall, confused security responding to overlapping alerts. Doctors shouting, alarms blaring, lights flashing. I pushed the gurney into the hallway, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to trust. But I knew one thing with absolute, unshakable certainty. I would get him out of here. I would expose whatever darkness lived inside this hospital. I would survive. And as the chaos behind us grew louder and the hallway stretched before us like a lifeline, I gripped the gurney and ran, praying we weren't already too late.